The pre-election contest over fixing the housing crisis heats up. Peter Dutton unveils a new policy. The government says it's a cheap trick, while the Greens go after the Prime Minister for buying his own clifftop home. I'm David Spears. Welcome to Insiders. With an election due within 7 months, the opposition leader has been under pressure to produce some policies. Yesterday, he did just that, promising to spend $5 billion to help boost housing supply. Under the coalition, the federal government would fund water, sewerage and power connections to fast-track new housing developments. The government says Peter Dutton is planning to give $5 billion with one hand and take $19 billion with the other. Labor's defended its own housing plans, including those still stuck in the Senate. The Greens, meanwhile, continue to push for changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax. And Max Chandler-Mather has seized on the Prime Minister's own recent purchase as an example of property investors having it too good.
With Australia in the middle of a housing crisis, the Prime Minister has defended his new multi-million-dollar property investment.
Well, Jodie and I are getting married. When your relationship changes, your life changes and you make decisions.
They're obviously planning for the next stage of life post-politics.
I'm planning to be in my current job for a very long period of time.
And I wish them well in that.
Millions of people are in desperate need right now. But the reality is we've got a Labor government with a property investor Prime Minister.
But I also know what it's like to struggle.
On a $4.3 million waterfront mansion in Copacabana on the New South Wales Central Coast.
Copacabana. What's the next line?
This is very tone deaf during a housing crisis.
He's entitled to have a personal life and to purchase property.
How do you respond to senior Labor sources who have likened the decision to Scott Morrison's Hawaii trip?
What I'm focused on is delivering more houses for Australians. Thanks very much.
Welcome to Western Australia yet again. Good to see you. Yeah, bright and early.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton has unveiled a major new coalition housing policy, a $5 billion fund to fast-track the development of new roads and water infrastructure to new housing developments.
And this is about restoring the Australian dream for young Australians who have lost it under this government.
We've got a $32 billion Homes for Australia plan. They're going to spend less money, not more.
It means putting real money on the table so local councils, property developers and others can actually unlock the potential of these sites.
The Liberals will cut. They've already announced $19 billion in cuts to housing. They're taking with one hand and giving back with the other.
When we say we're going to deliver 500,000 homes, it's achievable and it will happen.
Our government has the most broad and ambitious housing agenda, is working with the states to meet this incredibly ambitious target of building 1.2 million homes.
They may as well say 12 million homes because they will never reach their target.
Settle down, fella.
My guest this morning is the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, Murray Watt. First, let's check what's making news. Labor has won an extraordinary 7th term in power here in the ACT, setting it up for 27 years in office. At the close of counting last night, Labor's primary vote was down by just over 3%, but it's still on track to hold the same number of seats. Chief Minister Andrew Barr, by far the nation's longest-serving leader, will need to negotiate a governing coalition with the crossbench. The Greens could lose half their numbers, with 2 independents picking up seats. The Liberals' vote was also down slightly.
From here, we need to engage with the progressive crossbench, but I'm confident that we will once again be able to form a progressive and stable government for the people of Canberra.
Friends, they say that being a Liberal in Canberra is hard. And tonight, I think for many of us, it's even harder because we came so close.
Meanwhile, in New South Wales, the Liberals are set to lose the state seat of Pittwater on Sydney's northern beaches, with Teal independent Jackie Scrooby well ahead in the count. The former Liberal member Rory Amon resigned after being charged with child sex offences. In the Middle East, Israel has struck what it says were Hezbollah arms facilities in southern Beirut after rockets were fired into northern Israel and a drone was launched at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's holiday home. He was not there at the time and has called the attempt to assassinate him a grave mistake. We're going to start this morning on housing. As we've been saying for a while, this is going to be one of the most important issues at the election. Peter Dutton's foray into the debate shows the coalition understands it needs a credible policy to help boost supply, not just pump up demand by letting buyers dip into their super. It also puts more pressure on the government, which is playing down but not completely ruling out some sort of change to negative gearing and capital gains tax rules. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Raf Epstein, Paul Sakkal and Sarah Ison. Very good morning to all of you. Raf, let's just start on housing and Peter Dutton's policy announcement yesterday, $5 billion fund. Is this going to make a noticeable difference, do you think, to housing supply?
I think it's designed to make, or hopefully to persuade voters that he's doing something. I think it's one of the easiest things to do. You need utilities in new suburbs. It needs cash, so in and of itself it is a good thing. A lot of those new housing estates in Melbourne, I'm sure it's the same in other states, they don't have footpaths. So the houses have been built for a long time. They don't have footpaths, they don't have schools, they don't have buses, they don't have roads onto the freeways.
And why is this? You know, why does it take longer than it should to get the power, the water and so on connected?
Why does it take longer? Because I think there's a ton of people trying to do precisely the same thing. If you try to dig a trench for a power line or dig a trench for a sewer, there is a huge queue of people, especially in Victoria, waiting for those workers. It is a good idea in and of itself. It's not the hard stuff. The hard stuff is planning, changing the way you use land and building in established suburbs. That's hard, and that's where the homes need to be.
The infill and so on. But is more money going to speed up, Paul, getting the power, the water, the sewerage, the road connected to the house? Is this going to, or is the problem the backlog and demand for that stuff?
Yeah, well, the labour shortages, the construction prices, there's a whole gamut of different issues. I'm probably not expert enough on what's causing the backlog to know how much effect this will have, but it does allow them politically to say, you know, Labor's got a whole bunch of ideas which have 10-year, 5-year timeframes. There's lots of aspirations, lots of targets. Peter Dutton and Michael Sukkar can now just come out and say, we have a very tangible, very practical approach to look at greenfield developments, which we know exist and they have hundreds of examples, and we'll quickly fund them, and they have a nice big number, it's 500,000, and at the same time they can use this devastating line, which is that no Labor policy has built a single house in their 2 years in government. So this is going to be a big fight.
And they can say, you know, the 12-month time frame is so fast. If people don't deliver or start progressing some of this in 12 months, which sounds so...
If they can do it.
If they can do it in 12 months. But I think, like Paul says, that decade, when we're in a housing crisis right now, feels so frustrating to people.
Here's a novel idea. They could go to the Senate. Peter Dutton could hold up his $5 billion infrastructure fund. Anthony Albanese could hold up his $5 billion Help to Buy equity scheme. They could pass it together, and we could probably do with both of them.
Well, it's not a crazy idea, Raf. Your ideas are never crazy, because the government is responding to this by saying, oh, well, we're already doing something like that anyway. Now, their infrastructure money for the water and sewerage and power is a $500 million payment or fund that goes to the states and territories and local governments. Peter Dutton's saying he'd surf over the top and fund that directly from the Commonwealth. But bottom line, yeah, they're not arguing this isn't a good idea.
I don't think anyone can argue it. I think when I talk about these issues on the radio, there are a ton of good ideas. Government isn't about the choice between good and bad ideas. Often, it is about a choice between good and better, or most important. People are incredibly frustrated about the fight. The polarisation of politics leads to none of the ideas going forward. And in truth, both major parties and a lot of the independents and the Greens all have some good ideas, and the fighting drives people nuts.
All right. I might suggest that novel approach to the Minister in a moment. But I'm interested in why Peter Dutton has done a big housing policy announcement now, and maybe he gave us a bit of a clue with this comment.
And whilst the Prime Minister's got one eye on retirement, I'm firmly focused on making sure that we can build new homes for Australian families. I want to make sure that we can build these homes and backyards and make sure that young Australians have hope again.
Paul, is he trying to capitalise on all the attention on the Prime Minister's property purchase?
What do you reckon? He clearly is, and I'm fairly certain in saying that this was not meant to be announced this week. It was for further down the track. They brought it forward to this week quite impressively because, as you mentioned just before the show, they had every property industry figure standing side by side with them.
I'll show you some of that in a minute as well. But yeah, they had them all lined up, ready to roll.
Yeah, this was brought forward. They clearly saw a vulnerability on the government's part this week. We'll get to the politics of the Prime Minister's housing decision.
Well, let's dive into it. Let's dive into it now. What do you reckon? What are the politics on the PM buying this $4.3 million Copacabana house?
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister needs to stop making decisions that cause his colleagues to question his political touch, because his political touch, his political radar, his nous, his experience is what has got him this job. It's what makes him good at politics. He's an exceptional politician in some ways. He's not here for his soaring rhetoric or his policy brain or his details. He's there because he's got political touch. And the Canberra Press Gallery is prone to hyperbole. I think we'd probably all agree. Maybe some of us misread it on the day. I got to admit, I misread it on the day in terms of how bad it would be for him.
How do you mean? You thought it would be worse?
Well, there was lots of commentary on the day that this was his Hawaii moment, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't.
Which is a silly thing to say.
He hasn't. I don't know if it was silly at the time. I understand why people took that view. He hasn't abrogated his responsibilities. He hasn't lied. So this didn't have the legs that we thought it did. But what it did do was, as Peter Dutton will keep using from now on, it's raised the spectre of his retirement, which is not good for any Prime Minister. It reduces his authority. And to low information voters out there who don't really follow things closely, taking away the decision of the House, it's just exposed to them that there is this question about the Prime Minister's judgment. It's exposed to them that there's this elite opinion discourse about his fitness to do the job, and it creates negative momentum.
Sarah?
It's the second time in this term that the PM's made a personal decision about his finances, and then of course he should be able to evict someone if he needs to sell a house. Of course he should be able to buy a home that he wants to retire in. Should he do those things at the time in which he was doing those things, in terms of talking about how hard people are doing it as renters, at the same time as telling the person renting his home to get out? Should he be buying a clifftop mansion as, again, he's trying to tell people how sincere and serious Labor is about housing? And then, of course, as well, 6 months out from an election, of saying, hey, re-elect me. Also, I've just bought the place I'm probably going to retire in. Be seen as hedging your bets. It's exactly that. It's the nous, it's the timing. And again, not that he shouldn't be able to do these things.
Yeah,
you know?
Obviously there's an entirely legitimate view that he's entitled to do what he wants with his own money, and aspirations are a thing to celebrate. Prime Ministers don't typically make personal property purchases while they're in that job. Someone, I'm sure, will correct me if I'm wrong.
Hawke did, Keating did.
It's been a while. It has been a while, but we also haven't had a PM regarding engagement and marriage. This doesn't happen. And so this big life.
Can we talk about the public response, though?
I'm keen to hear what your listeners have been
saying. So I brought it up, and I was smashed by a lot of the people who listen to my show. And there is a huge part of the audience saying, what on earth are you talking about?
Totally.
The PM says there's a lot of press gallery hypocrites who've got houses close to where he bought a house. I don't actually know if that is true.
Not me.
But there is no doubt that a lot of the electorate are pissed off with the media for raising this.
Yeah.
I checked with my good friend and colleague Chris O'Keefe, who does the Drive show on the radio station in Sydney, 2GB, that broke this story. He didn't have... There's a lot of people on that radio station with some really bad things to say about Anthony Albanese. They did not have a go at him for this. I think the big divide, and I think I'm happy to cop the blame for raising it. I cop the blame on my Instagram reel as well. But the divide is between people who have a house and can afford their rent. They are like, what on earth are you doing bringing this up? If you are like Pip from Coburg, who spoke to us on the day we spoke about this, her mum doesn't have a mortgage. She's struggling to pay her rent. Pip's struggling to pay the rent. She is angry with the Prime Minister because it does seem like you're out of touch. So is it a problem with most people? No. Is it a problem with people who can't afford their house or their rent? Yes. And it is an opening for his opponents. And I think some journalists misjudged it, and I do think it was a silly thing to say. At the same time, when you ring his colleagues, you can hear their shoulders.
That's the other point, and I'll get to what the view is within the Labor caucus, because that matters as well. But I mean, you mentioned the radio talkback on this. Labor sources say there was a focus group in southwest Sydney, didn't come up there. Cos Samaras, however, from Redbridge, he spoke for our Insiders podcast this week to Mel Clark, and thank you, Mel, for filling in this week. He says they did a focus group in Melbourne and it did come up.
We were in Melbourne's outer western suburbs last night and in doing a focus group, and half the participants already knew about it, and let's just be diplomatic and say that they weren't impressed. It would take normally weeks for something like that to be raised with us unprompted within a sort of focus group setting, but it didn't take, they were very much aware of it and were keen to talk about it too.
Yeah, and you can catch that full conversation there with the QR code. So look, it's being discussed. Clearly, you know, this cuts through in a way that a lot of policy debates don't necessarily. What about within the Labor caucus, though? Everyone held the line publicly. Privately, though, some have been scratching their heads.
Definitely. I mean, definitely publicly they've been towing the line, and also privately. I mean, a lot of Labor MPs were screening my calls on Monday and Tuesday. One of them texted me after I called him and just wrote back, "Nice try." So there's a real Labor, there's still that disciplined caucus that we all talk about and a lot of journalists can get frustrated over. The Labor MPs that were frustrated and happy to talk sort of, unattributed, were frustrated, particularly about, as I said, that idea of are we meant to appear sincere now, in that sincerity about housing and really trying to do something for people at the same time as this has happened. Why now? Why not just wait 6 months after an election? Like, there was that real frustration that was going through.
Yeah, he did discuss it in informal chats with really trusted colleagues and staff members. So he was cognizant that there was a risk. There was reporting during the week that he was formally warned not to do it. I haven't gauged that. I think it came up, but he wasn't told not to. And the people who know him really well emphasise the really personal element involved in his decision-making on this. He's found someone who he loves later in life. She's younger. Her whole family lives there, like dozens of family members. He doesn't, in his heart of hearts, he doesn't know when his prime ministership is going to end, right? It could end somehow before the election, more likely next term. He wants to have a place to live with her after that. She wants to be with her family.
And I think
the only other house they have is the one where the Prime Minister's ex-wife lived with him. So that's an old house.
Would 6 months have made a big difference?
Exactly. That's the question.
That's the question. People, again, it's not that. The PM should not be able to buy these cliffs off mansion to retire. That's not what we're talking about. And it's about the timing.
This can often be part of, a second marriage.
Totally. It makes sense.
And Jodie's part of this as well. It's not just,
Just the context too, I think, for the PM and the people close to him, they're stuffed if everything in life is about polls and politics. For a lot of senior people in the government, they feel like they're in strife. For a lot of people in the opposition, they're feeling really cocky about the next election. So when something like that drops, that's why you get the response.
But everything is about politics in politics, and he's the Prime Minister.
And in Green seats, in the seats that the Greens have really got a threat to Labor, this is just another thing in the Greens' arsenal when Labor really doesn't need the Greens to have anything else in their arsenal in those marginal seats.
Well, let's move on. Time to talk to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, Murray Watt, to take us there. Here was some of the industry reaction we mentioned to Peter Dutton's housing policy yesterday.
We're very supportive of the announcement today for $5 billion.
This is, without question, a very significant investment.
Our builders are crippled by the amount of red tape that impacts our industry and adds cost to new homes.
Murray Watt, welcome to the program.
Good day, David. Good to be with you.
So industry groups are on board with Peter Dutton's policy, the Local Government Association too. Do you think this $5 billion fund is a good idea?
Well, it's pretty revealing that after all of this time, the only plan that Peter Dutton has put forward is pretty much exactly the same plan that we've had operating for months. We've already put out there pretty much the same amount of money to do exactly the same thing as what Peter Dutton announced yesterday. In fact, that money from us is already rolling out to assist state and local governments to do the kind of infrastructure works that Peter Dutton has just announced. Of course, the other aspect that Peter Dutton wasn't so keen to go into is that he's now also committing to make $19 billion in cuts to Labor's housing program. So really what he's talking about is a road to nowhere. He'll provide the infrastructure works, the same works that we are providing, but he won't be providing the housing which we're providing at the end of those roads.
Just to pick up on what you said there, my understanding is you have $500 million, not $5 billion for this infrastructure, power, water and so on. Just explain that to me. Do you have $5 billion being put into this?
We have a $4.5 billion program that is rolling out in stages. $1.5 billion has already been committed for exactly the kind of works that Peter Dutton announced yesterday.
I think $500 million of that is for those works. I was just reading the press release minutes before coming on air.
There is a $500 million component of that program, but all up it's a $4.5 billion infrastructure program. $1.5 billion is already rolling out to the states, territories and local government, and we have another $3 billion available for states and territories as incentive payments when they actually get the work done.
But is that for these connections, or is that more broadly for building homes?
No, it's for exactly this kind of work around these kind of connections, infrastructure, sewerage, utilities, those types of things. But of course, the part that we've also committed to that Peter Dutton hasn't committed to is an extra $19 billion in housing that he said he would cut. The Housing Australia Future Fund, he's blocking the $5 billion Help to Buy scheme. There's a new homes bonus scheme that we've put in place with states and territories that he'll cut as well. So it's all very well to fund that infrastructure like we're doing, but if there's no homes being delivered and funded by government at the end of it, that's not going to actually help anyone.
Yeah, I guess the difference here is Peter Dutton saying the Commonwealth would directly fund that work rather than paying money to the states and territories to do it. For the sake of compromise, would you be willing to support something like that if Peter Dutton would be willing to back your Help to Buy scheme?
Well, the point is, David, we've already got this program rolling. It didn't require the support of Peter Dutton. We're actually getting on with it. I don't think people really care whether the money is directed through states, territories, local governments or private developers. They just want to see that work done, just as they want to see homes built, which is exactly what we're trying to do and we're being blocked from doing by the Coalition and the Greens.
You are being blocked on that measure, the build to rent measure as well. Presumably you'll take these to the election. Will that be it, or will you have additional housing policies?
Well, we'll obviously reveal more on the housing front along with all of our platform heading into the election, David. But I think you can see a very strong contrast between the major parties when it comes to what we're prepared to do for housing. We even saw this week the Coalition admit that they are not prepared to even try to build more than 500,000 homes. It's no wonder they're not prepared to do that because they're cutting so many of our programs.
Just sticking with your plans, you will take more, you said, to the election on housing. Will that include any change on negative gearing and capital gains tax?
Well, what I've said more broadly, David, is that we will obviously reveal our policies on housing and other matters closer to the election. But you've seen many people, including myself, including the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, say that negative gearing changes are not part of our policy. We have the broadest, most comprehensive housing package in place already, with many different elements to it. Changes to negative gearing are not part of that policy.
Yeah, and we've heard you say that and others say that. It's not part of our current policy, it's not part of our current plan, and people remember the Stage 3 tax change that followed similar language. So again, will you take any change on negative gearing and capital gains tax to the election?
Well, all I can do is keep repeating, David, that is not part of our plan. We are trying to provide incentives to help renters buy their own homes, which the Coalition and the Greens are blocking. We are now announcing the first round of funding from our Housing Australia Future Fund. The Prime Minister was just in Queensland this week announcing the first 1,000 of those.
The questions about negative gearing. The questions about negative gearing. What's the policy rationale for keeping these rules in place at the moment? Why do you want to keep the existing tax breaks there?
Well, our focus, David, is about delivering an increase in supply of housing. Again, that's why we've got all those different parts of our program. They're all directed towards supply. We're also working with states and territories about zoning changes.
But negative gearing, I appreciate you want to talk about other things, but negative gearing, you believe that is important to boosting supply, and the capital gains tax breaks too?
Well, no, what I'm saying is that our focus is on measures that will increase housing supply.
But my question was about why you want to keep these tax breaks.
Well, we just keep getting into the same banter, David. It's not part of our policy. It's not part of our plan.
It's
what
a question.
We're focusing on.
Why do these tax breaks need to stay?
Well, we haven't made any decisions about that, David. We haven't made a decision to change that. We're talking about something that isn't part of the government's plan,
but why
rather than the many things that are.
That's all I'm asking. Why isn't it part of your plan to change it? Why do you want to keep it?
We haven't received any advice, to my knowledge, that will make a substantial difference to housing supply, David, and that's what our focus is on. What we're directing our effort towards is everything we can possibly do to increase housing supply, funding social and affordable housing, training up more construction workers, which we're doing, helping renters buy their own homes, providing the kind of infrastructure that Peter Dutton announced yesterday and that we've already announced.
Okay.
That's where our focus is.
Just coming back to negative gearing, Is the policy there for high-income earners to use so that they can buy multi-million-dollar properties?
No. I mean, what I'm saying to you, David, is that, to my knowledge, we have not received any advice from Treasury or anyone else within government that making changes to negative gearing will assist with housing supply. That's what we want to do,
understand
and we'll
that.
be taking up those sorts of measures.
But are you happy for tax breaks to remain in place that help high-income earners buy multi-million-dollar properties?
Well, that's been the established position in Australian politics for some time. We haven't received advice to change that. We haven't made a decision to change that. What we're focusing on is getting more houses built, and it'd be really nice if we had some support from either Peter Dutton or the Greens to do so.
Okay, but you don't support any sort of limit on how many homes or the value of homes that high-income earners can negatively gear?
We haven't made any decision to do that whatsoever, David.
But do you want any limit in place yourself on what high-income earners can do?
I haven't put that case within government. I haven't put that case outside government.
You must have a view.
Well, as the owner of one home that is heavily mortgaged to the bank, it's not something that I'm planning to do anytime soon. And as I say, I haven't put that view forward to my colleagues, and I'm not aware of my other colleagues having decided to do that either.
No, but what do you think? Should high-income earners have any limit on how much they can negatively gear?
What I think, David, is that we should all be working towards building more homes, and it'd be really good if Peter Dutton and the Greens assisted us in doing so.
I'll move on. Look, jobs. We saw the latest jobs figures during the week, and as the government points out, more than 1 million jobs created since you came to office. They were much stronger, the figures for last month, than expected. 64,000 new jobs created. Would you describe the labour market as being tight?
Look, I think that's a fair description of the labour market at the moment, David, where we've enjoyed a period of historic low unemployment levels for a very extended period of time. And as I said through the week, David, it is a remarkable achievement in the Australian economy to see over 1 million new jobs being created, the most that any government has ever delivered in any single parliamentary term, despite a slowing economy and despite expectations of a softening labour market. Now, it is a tight labour market. I meet with employers all the time, and the feedback that I receive is that it is becoming easier for employers to find workers than it was, say, 12 months ago, but it's still not easy. And again, that's one of the reasons that we're investing so much in skills and training.
It is a tight labour market, you acknowledge. It's for that reason that economists say it's going to keep upward pressure on inflation, make it hard for the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates. In your view, where does unemployment need to be to see inflation come down?
Well, I wouldn't put a particular number on it, David, but what I would observe is that under our government, we have been able to more than halve inflation from the rate that we inherited when we came to office, while also delivering record numbers of jobs. So I think that we're having to reconsider some of the economic orthodoxy, which has traditionally been that you have to choose between lower inflation or unemployment rates. We've been able to do both at the same time. I'm not going to suggest that unemployment won't rise. We do know, as I say, the economy is quite weak in terms of economic growth. We are expecting to see a softening labour market, but it's a real tribute to Australian employers and workers that we continue creating these numbers of jobs despite all of the barriers.
Business groups are worried about your industrial relations changes that have been put in place, in particular the multi-employer bargaining rules. Your predecessor, Tony Burke, indicated they wouldn't apply in the mining sector. Now they are. Are you willing to change the law to stop them being used in the mining sector?
No, we've got no plans to do that at this stage, David. I mean, we have just commenced a review of the first batch of legislation around our workplace reforms, and we'll obviously see what people have got to say through that review. But there is a lot of alarmist rhetoric out there from some employer groups in the coalition about what multi-employer bargaining is doing. As I think I've pointed out to you before, for all of that bluster, there is one multi-employer bargaining that has been actually reached at the moment in the air conditioning and heating industry. There are a number of other groups that have been authorised by the Fair Work Commission to do so. But you need to understand that there are several hurdles that have got to be cleared before the Fair Work Commission allows multi-employer bargaining to occur, and that's why it's not breaking out right across the economy.
No, but there are miners who have now been compelled to engage in a multi-employer negotiation. You already have a carve-out in the legislation for general building and construction work. Why not a similar carve-out for mining as construction has in the law?
Yeah, well, we took a decision when that legislation was passed to carve out the construction industry for some of the reasons that we've ended up having to deal with in terms of the CFMEU construction division. We just don't see that the same requirement is necessary for the mining industry. We are not seeing a breakout of multi-employer bargaining in the mining industry for all of the complaints that are being made. You're right, David, there is one case that the Fair Work Commission has authorised that to begin, but that's because in that case it cleared the hurdles. The Fair Work Commission determined that it was in the public interest to allow it. The majority of the workforce wanted that to happen. There were reasonably comparable interests between the companies involved, and there is no underpinning single enterprise agreement. So it's not an automatic entitlement to do multi-employer bargaining. It's a pretty high bar to be cleared, including the Fair Work Commission deciding that it's in the public interest to allow it to occur.
Murray Watt, you were in the Queensland Parliament once upon a time before you entered the federal Parliament. You lost your seat when Labor was swept from power when Campbell Newman won a landslide victory. Do you sense something similar is about to happen for the LNP and against Labor on Saturday?
No, I don't, David. You're right. I did have one glorious term in the Queensland Parliament before I lost in a landslide with a little bit less grey hair than now. No, I don't think that Queenslanders have got baseball bats out for the Stephen Miles and his team in the same way that they did back in 2012. As I mentioned to you, I was doing some door knocking yesterday in outer Brisbane. I've been doing it in a number of other seats.
What's the feedback you're getting?
Well, there's still a lot of undecided voters out there, David, is what I found. And, you know, while there are a large number of people who have voted already, there's a lot of people still making up their minds. So this week, I think both sides have got all to play for. I do think that the campaign has closed the gap significantly between Labor and the LNP. I think most people would observe that Stephen Miles and his team have run a great campaign, and David Crisafulli is emerging as a shifty, evasive person who doesn't want to talk about his plans for abortion reform, doesn't want to talk about cuts, and that's resonating with people.
OK, but your political judgment on which your federal colleagues will be relying come federal election time is that Labor is still in this race. They could still win on Saturday.
Yeah, I never think that an election is over until it's over, David. I think it's pretty widely known that regional Queensland is more difficult for Labor. But having said that, I think there are parts of regional Queensland that we can still hang on. Brisbane, on the whole, is holding up OK for Labor, and I think it's very interesting to see some of the momentum of the Greens starting to stall. We saw that last night in the ACT election as well, where for all their big claims about winning seats, they went backwards.
What do you put that down to?
Well, I mean, I'm not close enough to the ACT to exactly know that, but I think that what we are seeing here in Queensland is that people are noticing the Greens are increasingly blocking Labor's attempts to introduce progressive reform, and the Greens are starting to pay a price for that. It's one of the things about being in office is that people can see your record, and here in Brisbane, you've got 3 Greens federal MPs who are consistently blocking Labor's attempts to build housing, as well as campaigning against housing developments in their own electorates. So I think the Greens are starting to pay a price for that, but of course we'll see what happens next Saturday.
We'll see what happens on Saturday. Murray Watt, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
All right, well, a bit to get through there. Let's get back to our panel. We're joined once more by Raf Epstein, Sakkal and Sarah Ison. Just on negative gearing, Raf, I found that somewhat interesting. They still won't rule it out, and it's interesting hearing the defence of why the tax breaks remaining in place.
Well, he gives a very good impression of being a brick wall, Murray Watt, despite your best attempts. I think the questions are fair. I think people, when they hear a conversation on my radio program, they still ask, how come you get a 100% tax discount on the loss, but you only have to pay a tax on half of the gain? That is the way negative gearing and the capital gains, interact. The big question is, are the government going to do something on this? There's no doubt a lot of people inside government would like them to do something on this. Yeah. I think the polls too suggest that the problem maybe for the government is that it allows the coalition to say they're going to get rid of negative gearing. If the polls suggest that if you limit it in some way into the future, there's a fair bit of support for that if you can do one or two.
Well, that's what I found interesting there, that Murray Watt was a lot more cagey on whether there should or shouldn't be any sort of limit at all. Look, they're very senior level. They all say privately, no, it's not happening. We're not.
I mean,
but they won't spit it out publicly.
No.
And
I
say
mean,
we're not.
Murray Watt's also said that Treasury and the government haven't received advice yet. We do know Treasury is modelling this. They're looking at capping it at 2. Also, I think a good point was made by one of my gallery colleagues, Anthony Galloway, talking about it would be a pretty bad look if the PM buys this place and then there are changes, like he slips in.
Yeah,
and
no,
I think
agree.
that particularly that could be
right,
really damaging.
Yeah,
right?
maybe he's made it much harder.
Much harder, I think.
He's apparently definitely not negatively gearing that home.
Okay.
And I heard from someone yesterday that the reason they're not fully ruling this out is because there's still just low level of chatter about potentially doing something on capital gains, and nothing's been.
And if you don't take it to the election and then do want to change it, it can be hard. You don't have a mandate. But a lot of people within Labor say, it's a hard election anyway. Don't make it more divisive. Maybe some kind of tax summit really early in the term, where it's similar to the IR summit really early in this term.
Produced some surprises. That,
yes,
we
it
were talking
did,
about
right? So I think
bargaining.
people don't want it to go to the election.
Yeah. Jobs figures. So, this is absolutely something the government's going to celebrate, 1 million jobs. But, as is often the way with economic news, on the one hand, but on the other hand, it makes an interest rate cut, a lot further away.
Well, does it? There's a few things about that. There are a lot of economists who are saying that the underlying inflation, whatever measure the Reserve actually the measure they actually look at, is coming to within the band. You don't want the Reserve to be driving so hard at the target that they smash into the target. You want them to break before they hit the target. I think it's Deutsche Bank had a study analysing those jobs numbers, and I think this reflects a lot of people's experience. Sure, a lot of people getting extra jobs, a lot of people not working as many hours. People can feel that tepid economy. There are private economists saying actually the underlying measures of inflation are coming down, even without the energy bill.
But based on what the Reserve Bank, its governor and assistant governor have been saying now for the last 2 years, it's pretty clear they think the labour market is too tight. Murray Watt acknowledged it's tight, the labour market, at 4.1%. I think they've even given a figure that it needs to be higher than that before they're going to bring rates down. The government, they're going to celebrate the jobs growth, but Paul, they'd celebrate even more a rate cut, wouldn't they?
Oh, hugely. I mean, for all the talk about the tough economy, and no doubt it is a tough economy, a lot of people are really struggling. The unemployment rate has only gone up from about 3.5 to 4.1% as we've had generational increase in interest rate rises. I don't think this week had a huge effect. It took about 15 percentage points off the likelihood of a cut this year, according to market expectations. The key sets of numbers will be the final 2 sets of inflation data before the February RBA decision. So a lot of
inflation number in September inflation number, that might be really important as well.
Tough economy. Government's trying to do what it can to help, and this week it had a couple of interesting moves. So they're not huge, savings in your hip pocket, but one is to do with what's called dynamic pricing, where you go to buy an airline ticket or a concert ticket and suddenly you find when you go to click pay, it's a lot more than you thought it was going to be because demand might be higher or whatever. The other one is the debit card surcharges. Sarah, again, look, they're not going to save you thousands of dollars, but
they're very emotive.
They're emotive.
Very emotive. I remember when I read the press release, I was like, surcharges. I think you do get to the point where the coffee is already more expensive because of inflation and so on. You're already like, we've tipped over $5 for a coffee now, and then there's another charge, and it just starts getting at you. Same as the demands of a concert ticket, same as when you check out, and even then, regardless of dynamic pricing, there's more hidden fees at the end. It's not a huge impact to your hip pocket. It's just something emotional about feeling like you're being taken for a ride. People are all trying to get a bit of a piece and so on. So it's emotive. The thing is, though, I'm not sure about the longevity. Immediately, I feel like the announcement was made, that emotion is really quick. Does it have the longevity into the election? Does it have an impact that goes beyond
well, even the government acknowledges it's going to take a while to fix this. They need advice from the Reserve Bank and
2026.
So on. But on that point, these are emotive things, Raf. What are your listeners? How do they react to this?
Almost as big as the Prime Minister's house is the charge on the card. You've struggled to pay the mortgage and the rent. You've just suffered bill shock at the supermarket. And then if you're lucky, you're paying $4 for a coffee. If you're unlucky, you're paying $5 for a coffee. That 10 cents, if you look at that 10 cents extra charge, look down at the terminal and the card, 5 cents is going to the bank that provided the terminal. 3 cents is going to the bank that issued you the card, and then 2 cents of that 10 cents is going to Visa or MasterCard. It drives people
But the thing is,
nuts.
the lack of transparency here, we don't know that.
Yeah.
So they are approximations. They're not allowed to make money when you are accessing your own money on the debit card. They are allowed to make a profit when you're accessing someone else's money on the credit card. They blend those two things together, and as one bloke, one payment system, and at one for the business owner who rang me, who runs a swim school, that is $100 grand a year that he has to pass on. And again, the swim class, it's not an essential, but you really want to give that to your kid. It comes after the supermarket bill and the mortgage, and he has no choice but to pass that on if the government can deliver something on that. Just one more thing on it. It's small. If the government can convey to voters, and if when they walk into the voting booth they think, at least the government's on my side, at least the government is trying, that's what they want people to take from this. If they do, I'm not sure, but that's what they want voters to take from.
Just on the small business angle of this, there's a little bit of concern. The cost could be passed on to small businesses, etc. Something I found interesting was that a Labor MP I spoke to earlier this week sort of volunteered that they were a little bit worried about the announcement. They were saying we're making a lot of enemies, we need to make more friends. Now they mean broadly in terms of a lot of stuff, housing and so on. But for them, they were sort of saying we're getting small businesses offside and businesses offside, particularly at a time when the coalition isn't making that many friends in business. You know, the Woolworths boycott, whatever else. It's an opportunity to make friends in business. Yeah. The debit, the surcharge, particularly less so than the dynamic pricing. A Labor MP did say that they were worried that that could look to small businesses as, hold on, is this going to impact me badly? And do you care?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, I think in isolation, and people in the government even acknowledge this, like talking about how much air there is in chip packets or surcharges kind of in isolation can look a bit lame. Like, should this be what the Prime Minister is doing his daily press conference on? It's a bit kind of small fry. But as Raf says, taken together, it's given them at least a little bit of kind of message discipline in the last 6 weeks. They feel like they've been on message. They get caught up in Peter Dutton's kind of big barrages when sitting weeks occur.
They get diverted.
And when the Prime Minister makes stuff up, like the census thing, like the Tourette's comment, so they get themselves into trouble. But it at least has given them message discipline at a minimum, even if it's not the kind of big picture stuff that really captures.
And I reckon the big picture stuff, as much as you're right, that's the Prime Minister's job, but sometimes that big picture stuff I think can alienate people when it does get very big picture and it gets very political and stuff. It talks about legislation and all this, and then people hear the PM talking about air and chip packets and so on. I think that's refreshing. I think people finally...
And the PM's doing it more. Shane Wright, your colleague, mentioned that in 2022, the PM mentioned supermarkets 3 times. This year, he has mentioned supermarkets 90 times. Wow. And the year is not over. Well, so I think it does improve their message discipline. Just one other point on the unfair trading, though. We talk about dynamic pricing and subscription traps and drip pricing. We actually had the Consumer Affairs Watchdog on the radio on the day they announced that. It's a big stick. If you ramp up the unfair trading law federally, every state consumer watchdog has a bigger stick with which to hit people. Right. So the difficulty is in telling that message, and my argument would be you're one story less. The PM's house is one story less where you get a chance to
Speaking of message discipline, have a look at this. We're in the final days now, I guess, of the Queensland Election campaign. They had one of their debates the other day, and boy, they're both on message.
50-cent public transport fares, a plan to deliver GP clinics right across the state that bulk bill, a plan to keep down the price of fuel.
We are in a youth crime crisis, we are in a health crisis, and the fact the government won't say those words tells you they will never be able to fix it.
So cost of living is Labor's utter focus. You know, free school lunches, 50-cent public transport fares, youth crime, the crime crisis, as the LNP calls it, is entirely their focus. Is either more persuasive at the moment? Is it clear?
Well, the issue that, interestingly, and despite what Murray Watt says, Labor people know very well that they're going to lose.
Yeah, definitely.
I think he's spinning there. Or?
Yeah. It's just a matter of... But it's interesting, the question of how much they lose by, because about 5 or 6 weeks ago, they thought they were on track for an absolute drubbing. The one issue that has, according to their research, and this surprised some people within Labor who cautioned against it, is the abortion issue. We see a lot of this debate in the US. It's now sparked up in South Australia.
The LNP just seemed unprepared.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's the first issue that's made David Chrysopher, the opposition leader, look a bit they say, shifty.
Yeah, well, uncertain, I think.
Balance, yeah.
And so it looks like it's going to be a closer result now, which is good for the Prime Minister because getting a loss out of the way in Queensland means that they can have a better crack at Queensland next year. But if they don't bottom out massively, they can still say, you know, our brand is not dead in Queensland. It's pretty bad, but it's not dead. And the other element of this election that's interesting is, as Murray Watt says, there's some seats in the federal seat of Brisbane and Ryan where Labor is defending state seats to the Greens. Labor is really confident of keeping them, and they believe that the Greens are on the down. The New South Wales Council results were bad for the Greens. The ACT election bad for the Greens.
ACT was a smashing, yeah.
So Labor thinks that despite having a poor brand in Queensland, they can win some seats off
Have the Greens peaked?
Yeah, I was very surprised by particularly the ACT result. I thought, you know, the Greens were presenting this image of we have been in a coalition government, so you know us, but also there needs to be change. So Shane Rattenbury was actually making, you know, a pitch for Chief Minister. Basically, we can win the seats, which was a bit, you know, idealistic to say the least. But maybe that's what put people off.
Well, it's these independents aligned with David Pocock that have done well here in the ACT, and this mood for independence. You know,
new independent in New South Wales in Pittwater over the weekend. Yep. Climate 200 backed independent. I think there's a new independent in the NT Parliament as well. I mean, I think we have to be very humble about our predictions around elections, and I don't know how Queensland translates to Victoria, but you know, those independents are there as an alternative option, and they're doing well.
We don't talk much about the risk of the Teals to the Greens, but a big part of the Greens electoral bloc, it's not what they're pitching at now, but wealthier kind of educated people do vote Green, and the Teals are going right at them, so it's actually a risk for them too.
David Crisafulli, who the poll suggests will be a Premier in a week's time or so, he opposes nuclear power in Queensland. It's an awkward one between him and Peter Dutton, who of course wants to build nuclear power plants there and around the country. Peter Dutton did visit Collie in WA, where he wants to build a nuclear power plant as well. He met with the Shire President, I think some of the other councillors as well, and reckons that went pretty well. But he copped it for not having a broader community meeting about nuclear power.
Mr Dutton, why are you hiding from the people of Collie? Why won't you?
With the council, we had a great meeting. They were very obliging and very happy to have the conversation.
Why was it a private meeting? Why won't you be coming?
Will you meet with locals?
We're here! Why? Why do you want to destroy our land?
A small but vocal crowd, as they say. This is going to be a difficult one to navigate, I suspect, between now and the election. Peter Dutton needs to go to these communities.
I think he feels he's knocked off a scare campaign because Labor can't now say, oh, it could be anywhere. Yeah. And he feels that the safety issue is less of a big deal for voters. I do think, though, there is a complete lack of policy process. I have said to a few coalition people in my studio, you don't have a nuclear policy. You have a press release. You have a Google search. I mean, it is a substantial thing.
We still need to see that detail.
You need to see the cost. And before you criticise the experts, you've got to tell us who your experts are before you diss this.
Well, maybe through this parliamentary inquiry that the government's now set up, we'll hear from some of them. I want to turn to the Middle East. Big developments there again during the week. We heard this morning about the attempt on Benjamin Netanyahu's house that was unsuccessful, or certainly didn't hurt him. But the big development came Friday morning, our time, with the successful assassination from Israel's point of view of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, the mastermind of the October 7 attack, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, well, he talked about the significance of this moment.
Well, this is not the end of the war in Gaza. It's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages.
The beginning of the end, said Benjamin Netanyahu. Certainly Joe Biden is hoping this will hurry up that end.
Move on, move toward a ceasefire in Gaza, ensure that we move in the direction that we're going to be in a position to make things better for the whole world. It's time for this war to end and bring these hostages home.
Raf, will this be the beginning of the end? What should we read into this?
Can I read you a quote from Benjamin Netanyahu? In the long term, the effect will be to rein in Hamas because their leaders will know that they will be destroyed. He said that 20 years ago when Israel killed Hamas's spiritual founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. They killed Hezbollah's leader in the early 90s. he was replaced eventually by Hassan Nasrallah. Hassan Nasrallah turned Hezbollah into the biggest and most powerful force outside of our nation state. They then killed Hassan Nasrallah in recent weeks, and they now have, since that, they have Hezbollah rockets reaching further into Israel than ever before. Israel has killed thousands of Palestinian leaders and commanders.
So you're doubting this is actually...
I'm not doubting. I think it is important to acknowledge that what Yahya Sinwar did, the Hamas leader who was killed, no one will mourn his passing. However, he has fundamentally changed where Israel is in the Middle East. They have never had fewer friends. They have the potential for their leader to be issued with an arrest warrant, and they have the potential of an international court of justice just even examining the issue of whether or not they are committing genocide. So the idea that killing a Hamas leader like Yahya Sinwar is a step towards peace, I'm not sure that everything else that is going on points towards that.
The political reaction here, Sarah, both sides said no one's going to mourn this guy, but is there a difference still over this question of whether there needs to be a ceasefire?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest thing, I think, particularly from the coalition and a number of people, was this sense of vindication regarding, if we'd had a ceasefire before, like people had been calling for this,
we never would have got this
we
guy.
never would have gotten this guy, which is so important, and so on. So there's this that real sense of vindication from not just the coalition. There are commentators as well. Peter Jennings is one of them who's talked about, that's why the ceasefire hasn't couldn't have happened or shouldn't have happened before this. In terms of Labor's response, I mean, the government is seeing this as very significant. That's what they're saying. It is a really important moment. It is a point where there could be a shift towards a deal, and I think they want to capitalise on that. They want to be talking about that as much as they can. So there definitely still is differences between the two sides of politics on this.
Paul?
Just a bit separate to this, and again, your comments just prove how irrelevant our stance is internationally, really, in terms of what we call for next. But just
disagree. Australia has a big voice.
It's an important voice, but it's largely irrelevant to Netanyahu's plans. I don't think he's listening. But I'll take your point. This morning, I just noticed Andrew Tate, Jackson Hinkle, kind of really influential, malignant forces in the manosphere with millions of followers, and Clementine Ford on the left on her Instagram. She posted a repost of someone who compared Yahya Sinwar to Jesus Christ. Andrew Tate and Jackson Hinkle on the right saying that this man is a martyr. The amount of young Australians who'd be seeing this far left and very far right, this horseshoe effect of glorifying Sinwar, I think a lot more, possibly as many people have seen that reaction to the reaction of our political leaders, is very troubling.
Yeah, it is. All right, our panel, Sarah Ison, Paul Sakkal and Raf Epstein, will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with writer and comedian Alex Lee, and a very warm welcome.
Hey, Mike.
Alex, from fighting Tories to clifftop glory, the Prime Minister's bought himself a retirement pile. Is this much ado about nothing, do you think?
Oh, I mean, it's just such a confluence of a few things that will make it hard to go away. I mean, I think that just the sheer sort of splendidness of the house is a hard visual to get away from. But I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot of people who do aspire to have their own little house.
Pile?
Yeah.
The wonderful Brett Lethbridge cartoon Stockholm Syndrome,
Very good.
which is very clever.
He said, I've decided the best way to fight Tories is to become one of them.
Yeah, well, that's right. Can't beat them, join them.
That's right.
David Rowe has got there she blows with Dutton sort of surfacing offshore like a breach.
Yeah, I thought it might be a Duckburg. A good Chibalbo might run aground into.
There's a much more below the surface.
Oh, there always is.
The view was better on the first viewing with Jim sort of looking over. It's like sea change.
Not enjoying his sleepover.
It's a wonderful Dean Alston from the West Australian cartoon.
And right there, his house on the corner of Beach and Struggle Street. Clippity cloppity, look who's got property at the Copacabana.
The hottest spot north of Canberra.
At the Copacabana.
Where 2 bob each way is the law of the day at the Copa. He was in love.
And I love the Birkenstocks as well. I mean, that is a Marrickville uniform, and I'm glad he's bringing a bit of that up to the Central Coast.
Peter Brollman, I don't hold a tenancy agreement, mate. Obviously drawing parallels with Scott Morrison's Hawaii.
I mean, at least he hasn't pretended that he hasn't bought the house.
Yeah, that's right. I think Matt Golding has hit the nail on the head. Amazing views, crap optics,
yeah,
basically.
That's right.
It's
and I love the little expression there he's got on Jodie. He's very happy with her new home.
She's moving back to the Sunny Coast.
That's right. I mean, you can't take the girl out of the Sunny Coast.
That's right. I did love this comment by John Kadelka about sea level rises.
Yeah.
Forget the optics for a moment. I'm trying to work out how much more gas we can get away with exporting before this becomes sea level.
Just such a great way of bringing together
all those things.
All those issues.
Yeah. Given this cartoon, Malcolm Turnbull might be stuffed, right? His harbourside right on the water.
Oh, that's right. Maybe we'll get a bargain house when they all start offloading their harbourside property.
Alex, this week marked the anniversary of the Voice referendum, but for the yes side, it wasn't a very happy anniversary.
For me, I think it was just a time to reflect on how little we've managed to do in this area and how it's just sort of been ignored, it feels like, in the years since.
Yeah, it's really almost like, we've done that.
Yeah.
Lovely Kathy Wilcox here, Alex.
Albo here sort of trying to avoid looking at a failed legacy.
Yeah.
Instead of voice, he has void.
Void, mistreaty and mistruth, really. Ended up looking very pleased with himself here. Matt Golding moving things forward as he sees the Voice to Parliament as the falling dominoes and the bipartisanship sort of dead. About to go over.
Albo's setting it up as this really horrible sort of skin-covered domino of Dutton is about to knock it down. I mean, this is the stuff of nightmares.
Alan Moyer sees Peter Dutton as he's in with a chance, camping out, sort of getting ready to measure the curtains of the lodge.
That's right.
He's still there.
He's still there. He's trying to work out his squatter's rights. And his little suitcase there says the lodge or bust.
Yeah. I just thought this was a beautiful David Rowe cartoon, the anniversary. Pete's having his cake and eating it. Do you think he's making a wish as he blows out the candle?
Oh, I think so. And I don't think it's wishing well upon his opposition.
Alex, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, David.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mike. Before we get your final observations, a quick shout out to someone who has worked on this program since it began way back in 2001. Greg Field, he's one of our extraordinary editors and he's leaving us after all those years. There he is in his edit studio. You can see the little fiddle on the wall there behind him. He's actually a terrific muso as well. Greg, thank you for all you've done over those years for this program and others at the ABC. We wish you well. Hopefully you can enjoy the sleep-ins on a Sunday morning and we look forward to hearing more of your band on stage, wherever you're playing. The Stetson family, check them out. They're terrific. Sarah.
Final observation for me is on dynamic pricing. The industries we were looking at, the concert industry, the airline industry. I get married in 13 days, David. I think we should look at the wedding industry. Average wedding's 37, 45K. I asked the Treasurer's Office about it. They said, we'll let you know if it's in the remit. It'll be part of the consultation. So it's not ruling it out.
Don't rip off Sarah for her wedding, I think is the message.
Wedding industry is propped up by guilt. My final observation is, even before he bought the house, which raised more questions about his longevity, it is a unified government. He's got a very strong Praetorian Guard, the PM, so his position is totally safe. But people have started to turn their mind to next term, and some factional operatives are talking amongst themselves about not taking any leave after May next year in case there's a leadership ballot in the case of a bad election result.
I'm not sure if this is an observation or a prediction, but General Mark A. Milley was appointed by Donald Trump as the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was tricked by Trump into walking over the road from the White House when there were violent protests. He didn't like that. His quote that he gave to Bob Woodward in the new book, so this is a guy appointed by Trump. No one has ever been as dangerous to this country as Donald Trump. This is what he told Woodward. Now I realise he's a total fascist. He is the most dangerous person to this country. Top man in military uniform, appointed by Trump. We have 20 sleeps to go to find out if Donald Trump wins the election.
All right, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, the ACT Liberal leader Elizabeth Lee had no luck last night, but she might have more luck in our end-of-year Matt Price moment after giving us this memorable example of how politicians sometimes feel about those pesky journos. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
This is a treasurer who's been in charge of the ACT Treasury.
I'm waiting for you to answer the
I'm saying, you finished?
I just want you to answer the question.
Are you finished?
I am. Answer the question.
Are you finished or not? I will answer the question in my own way, Ian. You don't get to dictate how I answer the question.
Okay.
Thanks.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.